maybe we can start with the head honcho, commander-in-chief of the United States, Joe Biden. Recently, there was the whole spending row, a whole, will there be a government shutdown? They averted the shutdown with a initial agreed upon spending plan, but it excluded Ukraine aid, which angered Joe Biden. And he literally said, there's not much time to do this. Unclear always what Joe Biden is thinking when he says these kind of things, but he seemed a little desperate, especially in the tone and just the brevity of his language. But then Joseph Borrell said, well, if the United States is going to have trouble sending aid, well, we'll just do it. So there was this open divide with regard to this. And we'll get to Lindsey Graham as well. But perhaps before we get to Graham, your reactions to this, what the United States, I mean, this is the champion of this conflict. This is the principal provocateur. What exactly is going on here? This seems to be a pretty damning shift in political enthusiasm and just outright support for Ukraine at this moment. And I don't know, whoever wants to begin, maybe we can begin with Brian since.
Yeah, so looking at U.S. internal domestic politics and how they're dealing with this, it's very hard to tell what exactly they're really thinking, because there's a lot of theater that takes place. The Republicans want to appear as if they're opposed to President Joe Biden, so they have to obviously be opposed to his war, exactly in the same way the Democrats and Barack Obama were with Bush's wars, before doubling down on all of them and then starting all of the wars Bush wanted to start but wasn't able to during his presidency. So that I don't think that there's any genuine opposition. I mean, there surely are people in Congress who genuinely oppose this war, but many of the people who claim they do don't really oppose it. It's all politics. It's all theater. I believe they'll get the money together eventually. The problem, and as I've said, Alex and Alexander have said, the problem isn't money. They can always just print off more money. The problem is weapons. They are out of weapons. They are out of ammunition. They do not have the ability to expand production to make the weapons that they need for this conflict. All at the same time, they are looking at China, preparing to irreversibly surpass the U.S. in all regards, not just the U.S., but the collective West, the G7 even. And they're trying to balance their desire to eliminate Russia as a near peer competitor, and also prevent the rise of China. I believe they cannot do either. They're still determined to do both. And so this is a debate that they're surely having behind closed doors. It will manifest itself publicly in Congress, and I think it's very hard to make any sense of it. The people who say, let's go after China, it's not as if they don't want to wage war with Russia. They want to, if they could, they would wage war against everyone. But now they're forced to pick and choose. And then in reality, when you think about it, they cannot even stop Russia in Ukraine. How are they going to stop China within its own territory? Taiwan is technically Chinese territory, right off their coast, across an entire ocean. How are they going to do that? So it is a big mess, but that's what happens when you try to perpetuate unsustainable foreign policy.
I completely agree. Alex and I have done a program about this, and let me express my own views about this business in Congress. I think what a lot of people perhaps haven't fully understood is that this is a procedural battle. It is not about funding for Ukraine. It was about whether funding for Ukraine ultimately would be attached to budgetary appropriations for all sorts of other matters. Now, there is a faction within the Republican Party which is deeply opposed to that. And it seems to me that both the administration and the Republican leadership in Congress instead decided to go down this path of trying to keep these two things together, keep the funding for Ukraine as part of this overall package, because they didn't want to highlight the fact that there are some Republicans, increasing numbers of Republicans, who are angry about this and don't want to continue to support funding. And the hope was that it would, in that way, all be waved through. Now, what's going to happen instead is that the administration is going to present a Ukraine funding bill. There is a substantial majority of people in Congress, in both the House and even more in the Senate, who continue to support funding for Ukraine. And that bill will pass. That's the thing people need to understand. It will pass. The administration will get its funding. In fact, they've so confident that it's going to get its funding that they've already just cancelled that. You remember they were going to go for Lend-Lease, that there was going to be a Lend-Lease system. That's all been dropped because they're going to pay for it directly instead through these appropriations. Now, the reason they wanted to conceal the fact that there is this division, this divide within the Republican Party, is twofold. One, the sort of McConnell, Lindsey Graham, McCarthy faction doesn't want to highlight the fact that there is a split within the Republican Party, because that would show that they are gradually losing control of the party. And the administration doesn't want the issue of funding for Ukraine to become a debating issue, an issue that people talk about and debate in the forthcoming election. So this is an attempt to sweep the thing under the carpet rather than a concern about getting money for Ukraine. Now, the thing to also understand is that within the faction that opposed this appropriation, that is going to vote against funding for Ukraine, this is not a monolithic group. There are some people, like, for example, Rand Paul, who are straightforwardly opposed to funding for Ukraine. They are genuine non-interventionists. But there is another significant faction, people like Josh Hawley, for example, who are straightforwardly saying, look, we're wasting our money and our energies focusing on Ukraine. Our real adversary is China. We're depleting our military. So let's conserve our military, the better to go after China. So this isn't, in any conceivable sense, either a vote for peace. That isn't the debate that's happening in Washington at the moment. And it's not a vote against funding for Ukraine. Congress will vote through those funds. And even if it didn't, even if something happens, which surprises me, they will still find that money, because in Washington, money is always found. That is the iron rule of American politics.
Yeah, they're gonna get the money. There's no doubt about that. They're gonna probably get 60 billion. Yeah. Like Graham said, they're gonna get a lot more than 24 billion, 60 billion over the next year. What they liked to do over the past 15 years, not over the past year and a half, over the past 15 years, ever since Maidan and even before Maidan, the coup in Maidan, is that they liked to hide the money that was going to Ukraine.
Yeah.
They would combine it with other bills. They'd hide it underneath other bills and resolutions, and no one had any clue how much money was going to Ukraine. We still don't really have any idea how much money has gone to Ukraine. None of the stuff is audited. No one knows. I've heard 100 billion, I've heard 80 billion, I've heard 113 billion, I've heard 150 billion. No one has any clue, which means that it's probably 2 to 3 times more than any of the numbers they're putting out there. So the money's going to get to Ukraine. The problem that the entire political class has, except for the politicians that are running anti-political establishment, I'm thinking Trump and RFK Jr. The problem that the rest of the entire political class has in the United States is that when they start to create bills like what Alexander says, bills for Ukraine, a specific bill which says we're going to give 10, 20, 30, 50 billion for Ukraine. This is the Zelensky, we're giving you money to buy homes bill. When they create bills like that, then the American people, they get furious, they get angry, especially with everything that happened in Maui and in Ohio and all these other things that happened. And the people of the United States Saw no money. What's going on at the border right now? The people of the U.S., they start to see that, hey, they just gave another 10 billion to Ukraine. They gave another 20 billion. And people are getting angry. This is what they don't like. And they're trying to avoid that because we're in an election cycle right now. And I don't think either party, Biden or the Republicans, want to highlight how much money is specifically going to Ukraine.
Yeah, and speaking of having no idea how much money is going to Ukraine, we often don't know how much money is going to the Pentagon. Tens of trillions of dollars completely lost in audits, absolutely nowhere to be found. So it is quite reasonable to believe that Ukraine has received many more billions than what has been stated, and we just don't actually know where it went. Perhaps it didn't go there at all. And then the point that you made, Alex, about politics and the elections, I mean, you add Cornel West and RFK Jr. into this independent mix, and you have a pretty big political crisis on all sides of the spectrum, potentially pulling votes away from Biden. It is trouble for the neocons. And I wanted to play, I know, Alex, you played this video in your recent publication on your channel of Lindsey Graham, because we're back to as you guys stated earlier, the China, the Ukraine is all about China talk. And that's a great picture. That's a great freeze on Graham, by the way. But let's listen to what he has to say on Face the Nation, because I think this is really important. And I'd like your reactions to it, given that we are at a point where there will be money going. The U.S. can print money, can print it. It doesn't really matter. But there is kind of an ire of almost desperation here when questioned, and the media is questioning more about Ukraine aid maybe than at any point in the past. So here we go.
Have you asked Donald Trump, your friend, to come out and publicly support more aid to Ukraine and to push some of these skeptical members of the Republican conference?
I'll leave it up to him to what to do, but he wanted to get out of Afghanistan.
Well, Vladimir Putin has been praising him for his comments about Russia and Ukraine.
Here's what I'll say about President Trump. He did not pull the plug on Afghanistan, even though he wanted to. The biggest mistake we made since the war on terror is withdrawing from Afghanistan. To President Trump and anybody else, if we pull the plug on Ukraine, that's 10 times worse than Afghanistan. There goes Taiwan. To stop funding Ukraine is a death sentence for Taiwan. Putin will keep going. You missed all of World War II if you don't know how this movie ends. To the Republicans who say Ukraine doesn't matter to us, you're wrong. Respectfully, you're wrong. The war gets bigger, not smaller. There goes Taiwan. If Ukraine can beat Russia, China's less likely to invade Taiwan, and Putin gets stopped.
Have you asked?
So there you go. I mean, this is how Lindsey Graham is thinking about things, and it feels like a far cry from how we've been talking about Ukraine aid for a while now in terms of the neocons. They've been talking more about Ukraine aid as victory against Russia, with some on the edges talking about China. But now this comes up again from Lindsey Graham. Your reactions, maybe back to you, Brian.
He's completely delusional. He is absolutely detached from reality. He's talking about, if we leave Ukraine, what kind of message is that going to send to China? Well, what if you stay in Ukraine and you invest everything? You exhaust your military. You invest in a buffer zone, for example. A point that I made in my last video is that they would need to commit the collective West's air power in implementing that and creating a credible deterrent to Russia from escalating or responding. And if you did that, you would have nothing left to fight your war that you're trying to provoke with China over there in the Pacific. So actually, it's a lot worse for the United States if they continue this. Inevitably, they could lie to themselves. I was looking at Ben Wallace's article. He claims Russia has lost 2,500 tanks, 6,500 armored vehicles, 300,000 dead and injured, and these are numbers that are very similar to what the Ukrainian General Staff claim. These numbers are, again, detached from reality. You're lying to yourself. That is not the reality. There's no logical explanation as to how these numbers could actually even be. So he's making this argument because he's starting from a very flawed premise where he thinks that the United States is entitled to being the global hegemon. It has the right and the obligation, even maybe in his mind, to tell people from the Americas all the way to Eurasia how to mind their affairs, how to run their business, how to use their resources, what types of governments they'll administer their countries with. But it is a flawed premise, and everything they build on top of it is equally flawed. And this is where we see him making these delusional statements. It's not, let's think about this. It is not going to deter China, even if they were somehow able to stop Russia. It's not going to deter China. China is much larger. Its military much larger. Its industrial base much larger. And the situation between it and the island province of Taiwan is entirely different. The dynamics are entirely different. What makes him think that China would just simply back down? What makes him think that?
Well, indeed. I mean, the thing about Lindsey Graham's comments is that if you follow the logic that he's trying to pose upon you, there is no moment when you would ever say we've reached the point where we've done all we can do and we can't do more. I mean, always, if you're going to look about deterring other people, if you're stopping the next Second World War or whatever it is, then you have to go on giving and giving and giving everything and just go on doing it. Whatever happens on the battlefields, whatever happens in the existing military situation. Now, of course, Lindsey Graham was in Kiev a few days before the offensive started. He was shown the plans. He came away very happy. He said, this is going to work. This is going to be a tremendous, brilliant success. Well, it hasn't been. We're 4 months from that point, and Ukraine is stuck. But his response is, we don't step back. We don't rethink what we've done. We don't ask ourselves whether, we're on the right course. We just go on investing and reinvesting in this bottomless well, because if we don't, we have all these mirages that we're frightened of, that's going to encourage the Russians here or encourage Putin there or encourage the Chinese. It's a way of not actually looking at the problem. And of course, we could talk about the United States, but it is the Ukrainians who are paying the price, the ultimate price for all of this. So it is incredibly dangerous what he's doing, and it is incredibly wrong. And it demonstrates why, in my opinion, a person like Lindsey Graham should never, ever be in any sort of position where he can make decisions, because he is not making decisions in a rational way.
I just want to one quick thing I forgot to mention. Lindsey Graham did this exact same routine regarding the proxy war in Syria, and we saw how that went. Not only did they fail, but now the U.S. is getting evicted from its military occupation in eastern Syria, and this is because they're spread too thin. Now they're committed to Ukraine. They're committing themselves to Taiwan, so they're setting themselves up for failure. So again, what kind of message does that really send to the rest of the world?
Yeah, but this is his argument to give more money to Ukraine, to keep the war going. This is how they're arguing it now. It's all about China. And so they're going to the American people and they're saying, look, fighting in Ukraine is good because it's going to prevent China from invading Taiwan. So that's why you have to give more money and more weapons to Ukraine. That's how they're connecting things. This is the new domino theory, right? This is how they're rationalizing this. But because when you think about it, over the past 3 months, the whole narrative around Zelensky and Ukraine has been shattered. It's not about human rights. There is no democracy. Zelensky isn't a heroic figure. Ukraine does have NAZIs. I mean, it's all been shattered, and they're not gaining territory. They're not gaining any territory. They were supposed to be in Crimea by now. Zelensky and Budanov said they're going to be swimming in Crimea over the summer. They're not even 100 miles closer to. They're still in the gray zone. They're still in the security zone. So they've come up with this new script, which is this is all about China now.
Yeah.
I don't know who's going to buy it. I mean, who's buying this stuff? That's my question. Who's actually believing this?
I'm afraid a lot of people will.
Yeah, but they're selling it. Yeah,
I mean, there are going to be a lot of people who will. I should just quickly say, by the way, on as a military strategy, it also sucks. It's about the only thing I know about military things. But Frederick the Great famously once said that he who defends everything defends nothing. If you're going to stop, holding your positions in Afghanistan and eastern Syria and in Ukraine, and you're thinking that that's going to protect you in Taiwan. Well, it's not going to protect you in Taiwan because all your forces are dispersed in all sorts of places around the world, and there is a finite point beyond which your resources don't go. And that, by the way, is a very, very characteristic problem of the neocons. They never recognize that there is actually a finite limit to America's resources, that it just doesn't have the resources to go beyond that limit.
And by the way, the military that the United States has created to defend all of these holdings they have around the globe is a military incapable of fighting the type of intense, protracted, large-scale conflict unfolding in Ukraine. That is their primary problem. For the last several decades, they created a military to do these small wars and these occupations all around the globe. Now they don't have the military or the military-industrial base to fight a large-scale war, one that they themselves have provoked, and now they're trying to provoke an even larger one with China.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.